Our scripture reading today is from the book of Acts, chapter 10, verses 1 to 6, 9 to 15, 24, 28, and 34 to 36. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. In Caesarea there lived a Roman army officer named Cornelius, who was a captain of the Italian regiment. He was a devout, God-fearing man, as was everyone in his household. He gave generously to the poor and prayed regularly to God. One afternoon, about 3 o'clock, he had a vision in which he saw an angel of God coming toward him. "Cornelius," the angel said. Cornelius stared at him in terror. "What is it, sir?" he asked the angel. And the angel replied, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have been received by God as an offering. Now send some men to Joppa and summon a man named Simon Peter. He is staying with Simon, a tanner who lives near the seashore." The next day, as Cornelius's messengers were nearing the town, Peter went up on the flat roof to pray. It was about noon, and he was hungry. But while a meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the sky open, and something like a large sheet was let down by its 4 corners. In the sheet were all sorts of animals, reptiles, and birds. Then a voice said to him, "Get up, Peter. Kill and eat them." "No, Lord," Peter declared. "I have never eaten anything that our Jewish laws have declared impure and unclean." But the voice spoke again. "Do not call something unclean if God has made it clean." They arrived in Caesarea the following day. Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. Peter told them, "You know it is against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home like this or to associate with you. But God has shown me that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean." Then Peter replied, "I see very clearly that God shows no favoritism. In every nation he accepts those who fear him and do what is right. This is the message of the good news for the people of Israel, that there is peace with God through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Some of you know that one of my hobbies is competitive shooting. When I say that, many people picture this guy, who became the middle-aged sensation of the last Olympics, or the biathletes, but I am way too middle-aged for that. The event I do is a run and gun, or race gun style. You sprint through an obstacle course to a position where you shoot a few targets, then run to the next position and shoot a few more. There's a judge running right behind you with a timer because your final score is calculated from your total time and accuracy. It can be fun if you're good at it. Or so I've heard, because as I proved again last week, I'm not good at it. In the first obstacle course of the competition, I was doing pretty well. For me, what I lack in speed, I was almost compensating for in accuracy, so at the end, I felt pretty good about my performance. But strangely, I didn't hear the beep from the guy with the timer, which is usually instantaneous. After waiting for several precious seconds, I turned to look at him. Had he forgotten? Was he distracted? He's costing me time. But he was staring right back at me, and although he's not allowed to say anything, his expression indicated that I had forgotten something. It took me another several seconds to realize that I hadn't completed the course yet. There was one more position I'd completely missed. I thought I was done, but I wasn't done yet. And I share this because Paul repeatedly compares the journey of following Jesus to competing in a race that he wants us to win. Soon after I first became a Christian, I thought I was winning. I memorized Bible verses. I took firm stances on the right side of the culture wars of the day. I shared the gospel and stopped swearing as much. I'd become a Christian and I'd been baptized. I was basically done. And I suspect a lot of Christians, maybe including you, sort of feel that way. if you didn't grow up as a Christian, there may have been a lot of changes in your life early on, but by now you're basically at the finish line, just waiting for the timer to beep so that you can take the prize Jesus promised. But I wonder if most of us aren't more like I was last Saturday, thinking I was done when I was far from it. Because while congratulating myself on what a good Christian I was actually much closer to the spiritual starting line than the finish line. Prior to becoming a Christian, I was very judgmental, constantly decided who was good and bad using the most worldly standards, one's intelligence, wealth, appearance, or popularity. I gravitated towards high-status people, and I shunned those I considered beneath me, which was most people, frankly. But all that changed when I became a Christian. I had changed. My goals, my values, my behavior, and priorities were all transformed when I started following Jesus. It was a big adjustment at first, but after a few years, I mostly figured it out. I was basically finished, and yet still no beep. Turns out, I'd barely begun. Because what I didn't see is that I was just as judgmental and elitist as I'd ever been. I just shifted the standards. Now I shunned people who seemed over-sexualized in their dress or behavior. I judged people who were radical, promiscuous, goth, or gay. At college, I looked down on the frat boys who drank too much and chased girls. I avoided them, partially because they were beneath me. Partially because I didn't want any of my Christian friends to think I was approving of that behavior. And partially because I was afraid that they might infect me with their sin. I wasn't like them anymore. I was a Christian now. So I didn't like them anymore because I was a Christian now. So I can relate to Peter in the passage we read earlier. After following Jesus for 3 years and receiving the Holy Spirit in Acts 2, Peter, he basically finished the race. He was changed from being timid and worldly to being a bold preacher for Jesus. He stood up to the unjust authorities. He was a leader in the early church. And when he shared the gospel, thousands of people devoted their lives to following Christ. Peter probably thought he was done. He'd completed the course. He'd qualified for the prize. He was just waiting for the beep. But in Acts 10, the Holy Spirit revealed that he still had a long way to go. Our text began not with Peter, but Cornelius, an officer in the Roman army occupying Israel. Clearly an enemy of the Jews, and all the first Christians were Jews. But Peter would have shunned Cornelius even if he weren't a soldier, because he was a Gentile, meaning anyone who's not Jewish. Gentiles were considered gross, eating all that bacon and shrimp, forbidden foods that good Jewish people like Peter carefully avoided. In fact, Gentiles were commonly referred to as dogs, dirty, bug-infested scavengers. Peter was too pure to interact with someone like that. But in the opening verses of Acts 10, we get a deeper insight into Cornelius. Yes, he was a Gentile and an enemy army officer, but he was also devout, God-fearing, and he gave generously to the poor. He prayed regularly to God. But he doesn't yet know the good news about Jesus. So an angel instructs him to summon Peter, a church leader who should be thrilled to share the gospel. But Peter will not be thrilled for this opportunity. In fact, he would find it offensive because he found Cornelius offensive. He would say later, "It's against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home like this or to associate with you." It's true. That's what Peter had been taught, which is strange because it's not what God had taught. God had commissioned Israel to be a light to the Gentiles so that everyone could see God more clearly, and repeatedly commanded them to love foreigners in particular. But slowly, prejudice and fear took over. So just like most cultures have done, the Israelites created traditions to exclude others. It was little more than racism, but they called it religion to make it sound respectable. By the time Peter was living, they were proud of their prejudice. Good Jews would never eat with Gentiles and avoided talking to them when possible. They wouldn't even buy food at Gentile-owned shops any more than you'd buy dog food for dinner. That's the religion Peter had grown up in. And it's not so different from the religion that some of us grew up in, because that's what many Christian communities do too. We assure ourselves that we're good by pointing out all of the people we're better than. In the 1980s conservative evangelical environment that I was in, that was liberals, libertines, lesbians, drunkards, deadbeat dads, and drug users. They were bad, but we were pure, like Peter. So we avoided people like that, partially because we were better than them, partially because we didn't want our friends thinking that we approved of that behavior, and partially because we were afraid that we might get infected by their sin if we got too close. We built walls to protect us from the pagans out there. We called it faith, but it was fear. I know that some of you met Christ in similar environments, but later you changed. Well, sort of. You're still just as judgmental, but now you're proud to condemn conservatives like you once were. You might not say it this way, but you believe that you're better than the pro-lifers and proponents of purity culture. That's what Peter thought. He was better than those other people. Jesus likes us better than those other people. That's what I thought too. But this is the opposite of what religion should do. Jesus came to break down the walls that we keep building to exclude people who are different. Walls that also end up excluding God. The root of the word religion is lig, which means to connect, as we see in the word ligament. So re-lig means to reconnect something that's been torn apart. When we lose a healthy connection with God, other people, or our true purpose, the rhythms and rituals of spirit-filled religion are able to reconnect us. But too often, it does the opposite. It gets reduced to rules we use to decide who's worthy and who is worth less. As Jonathan Swift lamented, we have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love one another. How about you? Do you have a Cornelius? Is there anyone you find offensive? Maybe Donald Trump or Mamdani. Maybe Christian nationalists or Islamic jihadists. Maybe James Tallarico or Andrew Tate. Maybe trans people or transphobes. Maybe ICE agents or illegal immigrants. I'm not defending what these people have said or done, nor suggesting that their errors are equal. And sometimes righteousness requires resistance. But not all forms of resistance are righteous. Too often, these people are dehumanized as if they're demons or dogs. People it's okay to hate. Maybe even holy to hate. Maybe on this list, or maybe in your personal life, is there anyone you hate in Jesus' name? For Peter, it was Cornelius. He didn't want to share the good news about Jesus with people like him. He didn't want Cornelius to be forgiven or find fuller life. He wanted Cornelius to suffer for his sins like he deserved. That's how I viewed many people in my early years, and If I'm honest, I still sometimes fall into that trap today. Talk radio and social media are constantly arousing my fear and moral superiority, but they can only arouse them because they're already there, hiding inside me. So I'm preaching today as someone who's not yet crossed the finish line. Maybe I'm not the only one. If you recognize any of this from your own conversations, your own emotions, or social media posts, then you may not be at the finish line yet either. But there's hope. Because the story in Acts 10 doesn't only show that Peter wasn't done yet, it reminds us that the Holy Spirit wasn't done yet either. A lot of us assume that when we convert to Christianity, get baptized, or receive the Holy Spirit, that we're done. We're forgiven. We're finished. But when Jesus declared from the cross that it is finished, he meant that he made the full and final payment for our sin. So yes, we are completely forgiven, completely. But forgiveness is the starting line of the Christian faith, not the finish line. Now the Holy Spirit has to get to work healing us from all of the sin we've been forgiven of. And that's something that doesn't happen all at once. It's more of a marathon than a 100-yard dash. Because the Holy Spirit is gentle, concentrating on cleansing us one part at a time. He may start by focusing on your pride, insecurity, identity, or sexuality, your relationship with money, or power, or certain key people in your life. He'll get to all of them eventually, but it would crush us to deal with all of that at once. And just like in school, you don't take a math class once and, well, now you're done learning math. No, you keep coming back to it year after year, going a little deeper each time. So it is with the Holy Spirit. He heals my relationship with money in one season, but then returns to go even deeper a few years later, so that gradually I grow to become more free, to follow Jesus to fuller life. Peter's pride and moral superiority were dealt with a few times during his years with Jesus. But in Acts 10, the Spirit wants to go even deeper. It was one thing to learn to love the disruptive disciples, James and John, and much harder to learn to love the Samaritans. Now the Spirit wants to challenge Peter's prejudice against the Gentiles by picking one of the hardest targets, an officer in the army currently occupying his country. And the Spirit started by inviting Peter to a picnic featuring foods that good Jews would never eat, including reptiles and birds. But he was indignant. "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean." Can you hear how proud Peter is of his purity? He's one of the good people. But the voice spoke again. "Do not call something unclean if God has made it clean." Peter was still puzzling over what the Spirit was saying when Cornelius' men arrived to invite him to dinner. And suddenly, it all made sense. God was challenging Peter to eat food he'd always shunned, so that he could eat with a person he'd always shunned. When he arrived at Cornelius' house, he confessed, "It's against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home like this or to associate with you. But God has shown me that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean." By doing this, Peter was not approving of the Roman occupation any more than Jesus approved of extortion when he dined with corrupt tax collectors. So I'm not asking you or me to endorse MAGA or socialism. I'm not asking you to approve of ICE or illegal immigration. I'm not asking you to pretend that you support everything done by this administration or the last one. There's no denying that some people and ideas can be dangerous. But if Christ could love Judas, there's no one a Christian isn't called to love. some of those people seem like your enemies. But didn't Jesus command us to love our enemies? Peter had heard Jesus say that, but it was so countercultural, so unexpected, that it took Peter a while to understand how completely Jesus meant it. Peter had never imagined that it applied to Roman soldiers. You know, in the gun competitions, at almost every position, the course organizers sprinkle a few fake targets that we're not allowed to shoot in front of the real ones, forcing us to pay careful attention to where we aim our fire. And Satan does the very same thing, dangling fake targets to draw our focus away from him. He makes me think that my enemy is some politician or billionaire or the next door neighbor with the lawn sign that infuriates me. But that's the false target, designed to distract us. Because Ephesians reminds us that we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities in the unseen world. Peter's battle wasn't against Cornelius. The battle was against the demonic forces of violence, hatred, and greed that pitted two of God's precious people against each other. Cornelius wasn't his enemy. He was a hostage of the enemy whom Peter had been called to love. Because love is resistance against the forces that manipulate our resentment in order to control us. So before he could have any hope of rescuing Cornelius from their shared satanic enemies of violence, racism, and hate, Peter had to escape from them first. And that's where the Holy Spirit was leading Peter that day, until he could finally see that God shows no favoritism. In every nation, he accepts those who fear him and do what is right. If you've been reading the one-year New Testament with us, then you may have noticed that this is a pivot point in the book of Acts. In fact, it was a pivot point in Christian history. This is the moment when racism was defeated so the gospel could be released not only to the Jews, but to the rest of the world. Okay, not so fast, some of you were thinking. That whole racism thing? Yeah, well, maybe it's a little too soon to declare mission accomplished. Yes, in fact, it was a bit too soon to declare victory, even in Peter. Because 8 or 9 years later, when Peter arrived in Antioch, he was enjoying hot dogs and ham sandwiches with the Gentiles until some of James's more conservative crew showed up. And Peter stopped eating with the Gentiles because he was afraid of what those guys might say. After lunch with Cornelius, Peter may have thought that he was done, but the Holy Spirit wasn't ready to press the timer yet. There was still some more work to do. And this same thing is true of all of us. Whatever sins we struggle with, whether it's self-righteousness or racism, like Peter, or something different. Maybe your battle is with lust, pride, greed, gossip, dishonesty, or an eating disorder. Whatever you struggle with, you don't just deal with it once and you're done. There are invisible demonic forces that will keep dragging you back, or maybe more precisely, keep arousing the bits of that sin that are still lying dormant inside you. And that's why the Holy Spirit has to keep healing us, keep challenging us, keep going deeper and deeper each time until we're truly set free completely. No matter how long you've been struggling with some sin, God won't give up. The scriptures assure us that God, who began this good work within you, will continue his work until it's finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. But friends, a lot of us are making the Spirit's job a lot harder than it needs to be, especially when it comes to spiritual elitism, moral superiority, and hatred of people we're commanded to love. Every time I watch another video showing how stupid and sinister people on the other side are, I'm making it easier for the evil one to keep me trapped and harder for the Spirit to set me free. Every time I turn on Fox News or NPR, who insist that they're telling you the truth while those other guys are biased and lying, I'm just inviting the evil one to stir up my resentment and self-righteousness. Both sides rely on the same business model, keeping us angry or afraid enough to keep listening. But why do I want to feel more angry or afraid? A lot of us have kooky ideas about spiritual warfare. We dismiss them as fantasies about angels and demons fighting in the sky, but that's not where it's happening. It's happening on social media. Every time I'm deciding whether or not to click on that video with a clickbaity title, I'm engaging in spiritual warfare. The algorithm is designed to find whatever arouses your anger and fear and give you more of it. So we think that our neighbor is the target, when in fact it's the sin in myself I should be aiming at. The algorithm, which we never see directly, may be the best weapon the devil has ever had. So the next time you're tempted to mindlessly turn on talk radio or open social media, pray for wisdom and courage, because you're entering a spiritual battle. All of us are in a spiritual battle, but for each of us, the battle front is unique. So my final question for you today is, who is your Cornelius? Just like Peter graduated from James and John to the Samaritans to Cornelius, who's the next person the Spirit is challenging you to learn how to love? I've had lots of Corneliuses in my life. In college, it was my close Christian friend who disclosed to me that he was gay. That challenged my categories back then, but in the best kind of way. Years later, when I was a youth pastor, there was a woman in our church whose son was doing drugs and getting into fights and going to jail. He was the kind of person I avoided in college, but bit by bit, we learned to love each other. And I became the person he'd use his one phone call on. Along the way, he introduced me to his gang of juvenile delinquents, and we started a Bible study together where I got to see the power of the gospel in places I never expected it and in ways that I'd rarely experienced before. Each time I have an epiphany like that, I'm tempted to think, oh, I'm finally done. I've reached the finish line. But each time the Spirit shows me the next Cornelius I need to learn to love. So what might that look like practically this week? Start by praying with David. Search me, Lord, show me my anxieties, expose anything offensive, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Next, pay attention to your emotions this week. Notice whenever you feel fury or fear. Wherever you turn for information is also a source of spiritual formation. So how is this source or story forming you? Ask that in prayer. Is it bringing you closer to Jesus or pulling you further away? You might find it helpful to use the Examen, a pattern of nightly prayer written by St. Ignatius that helps us pay attention to the way God and the spiritual forces of evil are at work in us that we too often don't notice. If you check the description below this video, you'll see a link to that there. I'm going to be praying the Examen this week because unlike that competition where I was standing around waiting for the beep, in this race, I already know that I'm not finished yet. But I also know that I can follow Jesus all the way to victory. And that is my final encouragement for you today. It's so easy to congratulate ourselves too soon or condemn ourselves too much. But the Apostle Paul shows us a better way. Paul, who risked his life for the gospel, established churches all over the world, and wrote about a quarter of the New Testament, Paul knew he wasn't done yet. He'd been changed by the Holy Spirit dramatically and undeniably, but he still had more healing to do, more repenting to do before he reached the finish line. So after describing the heavenly prize, Paul admitted, "No, dear brothers and sisters, I've not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. Friends, wherever you are in that race, don't give up. Because this race matters, and God won't give up on you.